England, 1802. The January wind howled through the ancient stone corridors of St. George's Chapel, Windsor, as Caroline Fletcher stood before the altar. At 20 years of age, she was no longer considered young by society's standards, yet she felt like a child playing dress-up in her ivory silk wedding gown, the fabric far finer than anything she had worn in years. "Speak now, or forever hold your peace," the vicar intoned, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Caroline dared a glance at her soon-to-be husband. Hugh Aldridge, the Duke of Silverton, stood tall and rigid beside her, his jawline tense beneath perfectly groomed sideburns. At 32, he cut an imposing figure in his formal attire, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that held a slight curl despite his attempts to tame it. His eyes, a startling shade of blue-grey, remained fixed ahead, never once meeting hers throughout the ceremony. The silence that followed the vicar's words was deafening. No one would dare object to the union between a duke and the daughter of a disgraced viscount. Caroline's father, Lord Fletcher, stood in the front pew, relief etched into every line of his aging face. This marriage would save them from complete ruin, would pay the gambling debts that threatened to send him to debtor's prison. When it came time to speak her vows, Caroline's voice trembled only slightly. "I, Caroline Elizabeth Fletcher, take thee, Hugh William Aldridge." The Duke's responses were clipped and cold. Not once did his expression soften, not even as he slipped the gold band onto her finger. His touch was impersonal, as if he were conducting a business transaction rather than pledging his life to hers. The wedding breakfast that followed at Silverton House in Mayfair was an elegant but sombre affair. Caroline sat beside her new husband at the head table, barely touching the lavish spread before her. Around them, London's elite raised crystal glasses in toast after toast, celebrating a union that both parties had entered with reservation. "You look pale, Your Grace," remarked Lady Harrington, an elderly dowager with sharp eyes. "Marriage agrees with you already, I see." Caroline attempted a smile. "The excitement of the day, I imagine." The old woman replied, clearly unconvinced. She leaned closer. "A word of advice, my dear. Dukes require handling with both firmness and grace, remember that." Before Caroline could respond, Hugh rose from his seat. "If you'll excuse us, Lady Harrington, I must speak with my wife privately." He offered Caroline his arm, the first gesture of courtesy he had shown all day. She took it hesitantly, allowing him to guide her from the grand dining room into a smaller study, lined with leather-bound books and hunting trophies. Once the door closed behind them, he released her immediately, moving to stand by the window that overlooked the gardens, now dormant in winter's grip. "I trust the arrangements are satisfactory?" he asked, his back to her. "Yes, Your Grace. Everything is lovely." He turned then, regarding her with those cold eyes. "Please, we are married now. You must call me Hugh." "Hugh," she repeated softly. A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Finally he sighed, a sound of resignation rather than contentment. "I understand this is not the match you dreamed of," he said, "but I assure you, I will provide for you generously. You shall want for nothing material." Caroline summoned her courage. "May I ask, sir, Hugh, why you chose me? Surely there were more advantageous matches to be made." Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or anger, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "My reasons are my own," he replied tersely. "But know this, I require a wife who understands discretion and duty. Your father spoke highly of your practical nature and your ability to manage a household despite reduced circumstances." She flinched at the reference to her family's fall from grace. Once the Fletchers had been respected, even admired. Then came her father's gambling, her mother's death from consumption, and the gradual selling off of family heirlooms to maintain appearances. "I shall endeavor to meet your expectations," she said quietly. Hugh nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "Good. We shall depart for Silverton Abbey tomorrow. It's my primary estate in Derbyshire. The London season holds little appeal for me." With that he moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "Oh, and Caroline?" "Yes?" "I should inform you that ours will be a marriage in name only. I have no interest in complicating matters with heirs at present. You will have your own suite of rooms. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone among the mounted stag heads and portrait of stern-faced Aldridge ancestors who seemed to judge her from their gilded frames. Caroline sank into a nearby chair, her wedding gown pooling around her. This was to be her life now, a duchess in title only, married to a man who could barely stand to look at her. Yet it was still preferable to watching her father dragged off to prison, or worse, forced to sell his last remaining property, the modest country house in Kent where she had grown up. She straightened her shoulders. She would make the best of this arrangement. Perhaps in time they might develop some form of companionship, if not affection. How wrong she would prove to be. The journey to Derbyshire the following day was conducted in near-complete silence. They travelled in the Duke's luxurious private carriage, its Aldridge crest emblazoned on the doors, 4 matched greys pulling them northward at a steady pace. Caroline had attempted conversation several times, only to receive monosyllabic responses or distracted nods. By mid-afternoon, rain began to fall, pattering against the carriage roof and windows. Caroline watched the landscape change from the neat hedgerows of the south to the wilder, more rugged terrain of the Midlands. Hugh buried himself in papers from a leather portfolio, occasionally making notes with a silver pencil. As dusk approached, Caroline noticed they were turning onto a side road, away from the main route to Derbyshire. "Are we making a stop for the night?" she ventured to ask. Hugh glanced up, seeming almost surprised to find her still there. "No. There has been a change of plans." The carriage continued down increasingly narrow lanes, the countryside growing more desolate with each passing mile. Finally they crested a hill, and Caroline gasped at the sight before her. Spread across a windswept moor, partially shrouded in mist, stood a grey stone mansion. Unlike the elegant symmetry of London townhouses, this building appeared to have grown organically over centuries, with wings and turrets added seemingly at random. A low stone wall surrounded extensive grounds, and beyond that, nothing but heath and sky for miles. "Greymoor Estate," Hugh announced, his voice oddly flat. "We arrive." "This isn't Silverton Abbey," Caroline said, confusion evident in her tone. "No, this is where you will be residing." The carriage pulled through wrought-iron gates and up a long gravel drive. As they approached, Caroline could see that while imposing, the house had an air of neglect. Several windows were shuttered, and ivy had claimed much of the eastern wall. "I don't understand," she said, her heart beginning to race. "You said we would be going to your estate in Derbyshire." Hugh finally met her eyes directly. "I said I would be going to Derbyshire. You, Duchess, will remain here." The carriage stopped before the main entrance. Hugh stepped down without waiting for the footman, then turned to offer her his hand with cold formality. Numb with shock, Caroline allowed him to help her descend. A line of servants awaited them, far fewer than would be expected for a ducal residence, and all wearing expressions as sombre as their black and grey livery. "To your grace," an older woman with silver-streaked hair curtsied deeply. "We've prepared everything according to your instructions." "Thank you, Mrs. Ellis," Hugh replied. "May I present her grace, the Duchess of Silverton. She will be taking up residence at Greymoor indefinitely." Caroline stared at him in disbelief. "Indefinitely? Hugh, what is the meaning of this?" His expression hardened. "The meaning, Caroline, is that our arrangement has served its purpose. Your father's debts are paid. The marriage contract is fulfilled. Now we shall each continue with our lives separately." "But why?" she whispered, mindful of the servants witnessing her humiliation. "What have I done to offend you so?" "Nothing," he said, and for a moment, something like regret crossed his features. "This was always my intention. I require a duchess for legal matters, not a wife in my home." Rain began to fall more heavily, soaking through Caroline's travelling cloak. Hugh seemed not to notice, or perhaps not to care. "Mrs. Ellis will see to your needs," he continued briskly. "You will have an adequate allowance for household management and personal expenses. The estate includes tenant farms that provide some income, which you may direct as you see fit." "And you?" Caroline asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Where will you be?" "Anywhere but here," he replied coldly. "Greymoor has unpleasant associations for me. I acquired it through an unfortunate connection, and have no desire to set foot in it again after today." He turned to Mrs. Ellis. "Have my things brought to the carriage. I'll not be staying the night." "Yes, Your Grace," the housekeeper replied, dispatching a footman with a glance. Caroline stood motionless, rain streaming down her face. mingling with tears she refused to acknowledge. This was beyond a cold marriage of convenience. This was banishment. "You cannot simply abandon me here," she said, finding her voice at last. "We are husband and wife before God and the law." Hugh's laugh was without humor. "God has little to do with our arrangement, Caroline. And the law? The law says what is mine, including you. Be grateful I've provided you with comfort and security. Many in your position would not be so fortunate." A footman approached with Hugh's traveling case. The Duke took it with a nod of thanks, then turned back to Caroline. "I have one final instruction," he said, his voice lowering. "You are not to use the Silverton name or title in London society. If you must travel, you will present yourself as Lady Caroline, a widow. Any correspondence you send to my solicitors must be marked with your maiden name only. Is that understood?" Caroline felt as though she had been slapped, not only exiled, but erased. "And if I refuse these conditions?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Something dangerous flashed in Hugh's eyes. "Then perhaps your father might find his newfound financial security short-lived." The threat hung in the air between them. Caroline thought of her father, weak, selfish, but the only family she had left, and knew she had no choice. "As you wish, Your Grace," she said, dropping into a deep curtsy that mocked them both. Hugh hesitated, seeming about to speak again, but instead turned on his heel and strode back to the waiting carriage. Without a backward glance, he climbed inside, and within moments the vehicle was rolling down the drive, taking with it any hopes Caroline had harbored for her future. Mrs. Ellis stepped forward, gently taking her arm. "Come inside, Your Grace. You're soaked through." Caroline allowed herself to be led into the great hall of Greymore Estate, her new prison. The massive oak door closed behind her, with the finality of a tomb. In the entrance hall, a portrait hung above the stone fireplace, a stern-faced man from a previous century, an ancestor of some former owner. He gazed down at her with painted eyes that seemed to hold the same contempt as the man who had just abandoned her. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Mrs. Ellis said softly. Caroline looked around at the dusty grandeur, the faded tapestries, the silent servants watching her with curious eyes. "My name," she said quietly but firmly, "is Caroline." Yorkshire, 1805, 3 years later. "Mrs. Hodgson will need to replace the east wing roof before winter," Caroline said, making notes in her household ledger. "The last storm loosened more tiles, and I'll not have the maids catching their death from drafts again this year." The housekeeper nodded, respect evident in her gaze. "Yes, Your Grace, Caroline. I'll have Mr. Farley send for the roofers from Whitby." They sat in what Caroline now called the morning room, once a dreary parlour that she had transformed with pale yellow wallpaper and white muslin curtains that billowed in the summer breeze. Outside, the Yorkshire moors stretched to the horizon, purple with heather in the August sunshine. In 3 years, Greymore had changed almost as much as its mistress. When Caroline had arrived, the estate had been half abandoned, its farms neglected, its interiors gloomy with decades of dust and disuse. Now, while still far from grand, it had become a well-ordered, pleasant home. Mrs. Ellis had retired 6 months after Caroline's arrival, her rheumatism too painful to allow her to continue. In her place, Mrs. Hodgson, a local farmer's widow, had taken over as housekeeper, bringing practical knowledge of the area and its people that proved invaluable. "The harvest looks promising this year," Mrs. Hodgson continued. "Mr. Cooper says the wheat field should yield 1/3 more than last season." Caroline smiled. "Excellent. Please tell him I'd like to review the accounts next week." She closed her ledger, rising from her desk. "I think I'll ride out to check on the new fencing at the north pasture. Would you have Simmons prepare Athena?" "Of course. Shall I send William to accompany you?" "No need. I know these moors better than anyone now, I should think." Mrs. Hodgson smiled indulgently. "As you say, though the stablemaster won't approve." Caroline laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent months. "Mr. Simmons disapproves of most things I do with horses. He still believes ladies should only ride side-saddle on docile mares." "And yet he keeps training those spirited beasts for you," Mrs. Hodgson observed with a knowing look. "He enjoys the challenge, though he'd never admit it." Half an hour later, Caroline was galloping across the moor, the wind in her hair, her riding habit, a practical garment of forest green wool rather than the fashionable fripperies of London, flapping behind her. Athena, a sleek bay mare with a white star on her forehead, seemed as eager for the exercise as her mistress. As they crested a hill overlooking the estate, Caroline reined in, allowing herself a moment to survey what had become her domain. Greymore sprawled below, its grey stone walls softened by climbing roses she had planted in her first spring. Beyond the main house, tenant cottages dotted the landscape, their chimneys sending up thin spirals of smoke. Fields of golden wheat and barley stretched toward the east, while sheep grazed on the higher ground to the north. It wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was hers. The isolation that had once felt like punishment had become a strange sort of freedom. Here, far from London society and its judgments, she answered to no one. She made decisions, solved problems, earned the respect of those who worked the land. The quarterly allowance from the Duke's solicitors arrived like clockwork, accompanied by terse notes acknowledging receipt of her reports on the estate's management. The sums were generous enough to maintain Greymore comfortably, with enough left over for modest improvements. Caroline had learned to budget carefully, to plan for lean years, to invest in the estate's future. She had received exactly 3 personal communications from Hugh in 3 years. The first, 6 months after her exile, had been a formal notification of her father's death from apoplexy. The second, a year later, was a curt note informing her that he had arranged for her childhood home in Kent to be sold, with the proceeds added to her allowance. The third, received just last month, had been the strangest. A single line asking if she required anything for her comfort at Greymore. She had not replied. Turning Athena toward the north pasture, Caroline pondered that last message. Why, after years of silence, would he suddenly express concern for her comfort? Perhaps his conscience troubled him, though she doubted he possessed such a thing. The new fencing was progressing well, she noted upon reaching the pasture. The sturdy oak posts would keep the sheep safely contained even in the worst winter storms. Satisfied, she was about to return to the house when she noticed a rider in the distance, approaching from the direction of the village. It was Dr. Bennet, Greymore's nearest neighbour and the local physician. Caroline waved, guiding Athena toward him. "Good day, Dr. Bennet," she called as they drew closer. "What brings you out this way?" Edward Bennet was a man of about 40, with kind eyes and a beard just beginning to show threads of silver. He had been one of the few neighbours to call upon Caroline after her arrival, offering friendship without prying into her unusual circumstances. "Lady Caroline," he greeted her with a warm smile. "I was hoping to find you. I've just returned from London with news and thought you might appreciate a visitor." They fell into step, their horses walking side by side toward Greymore. "London? How fared the metropolis? I scarce remember it these days." "Crowded, noisy, and altogether too warm for summer," he replied good-naturedly. "I was attending a medical conference at St. Bartholomew's." Caroline nodded. Dr. Bennet was unusually progressive in his practice, always seeking new knowledge and treatments. "And what news do you bring? Has peace with France been declared at last?" "Alas, no. Bonaparte continues his conquests, but I did hear something that might interest you more personally." He hesitated. "It concerns the Duke of Silverton." Caroline's hands tightened on the reins, causing Athena to toss her head in protest. "Oh? Has His Grace taken a new bride, perhaps? I'm surprised it took him this long." Dr. Bennet gave her a shrewd look. "No, nothing of that sort. There was talk that he's been ill, quite seriously from what I gathered." "Ill?" Despite everything, Caroline felt a twinge of something. Concern. Curiosity. What ails him? The specifics were vague, as such matters often are among the nobility. Something about a fever contracted during his travels. He was in India, I believe. Caroline frowned. She had not known Hugh had gone abroad. "Is he expected to recover?" That was unclear. "Lord Hartley, you remember him, the gentleman with the gout who visited his sister near here last summer. He mentioned seeing the Duke at his club looking like death warmed over, to quote him directly." They had reached the stable yard. Caroline dismounted, passing Athena's reins to a waiting groom. "Well," she said, striving for nonchalance, "I suppose even dukes are mortal." Dr. Bennet's expression was sympathetic as he too dismounted. "Indeed. Though I thought you should know, given your connection." "Thank you for your consideration," Caroline replied, her tone more formal than she intended. "Will you stay for tea? Mrs. Hodgson has made seed cake." The doctor accepted readily, and they spent a pleasant hour discussing village news and his observations from London. Yet Caroline found her thoughts repeatedly straying to Hugh. Ill, perhaps seriously so. The man who had abandoned her without a backward glance, who had threatened her father, who had condemned her to exile. She should feel nothing but satisfaction at his suffering. So why did an unfamiliar disquiet settle in her chest? After Dr. Bennet departed, Caroline retreated to her private sitting room, once a gloomy chamber with heavy velvet draperies that she had transformed into a cozy retreat with bookshelves and comfortable furniture. The pianoforte in the corner, ordered from York 2 years ago, had been her one true indulgence. Music had always soothed her, and in the long, quiet evenings at Greymoor, it had become her faithful companion. She sat at the instrument now, running her fingers over the keys without playing. Hugh ill in London, perhaps even dying. What would become of her if he died? Would his heir, some distant cousin, she presumed, honour the arrangements that kept Greymoor functioning? Or would she find herself truly homeless, without even this remote refuge? The practical questions were easier to contemplate than the emotional tangle beneath them. In 3 years she had built a life from the ruins of his rejection. She had found purpose, respect, even contentment. Yet she remained legally bound to a man who despised her, her future subject to his whim. With sudden resolve, Caroline moved to her writing desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. For the first time since her banishment, she would write to Hugh directly, not to his solicitors. She would inquire about his health, remind him of her existence, perhaps even request some clarification of her position should the worst occur. She penned a draft, then another, each attempt sounding either too cold or too concerned. Finally, she settled on a brief note. Your Grace, word has reached Yorkshire of your illness. While our circumstances are unusual, I feel it proper to inquire after your health and to express my hopes for your recovery. Should you wish to address any matters regarding the future administration of Greymoor Estate, I remain at your disposal. Your obedient servant, Caroline Aldridge, Duchess of Silverton. She deliberately used the title he had forbidden her, a small act of defiance. Let him be reminded that whatever his feelings, they remained legally bound. The letter was dispatched the following morning. Caroline told herself she expected no reply, yet found herself watching for the post with unprecedented interest in the days that followed. A fortnight passed with no response. Caroline gradually returned to her normal routines, the letter fading from her immediate concerns amid the daily management of the estate. The harvest began, consuming everyone's attention as wagons of wheat and barley rolled in from the fields. It was during this busy period, as September drew to a close, that the weather turned. What began as a light rainfall in the afternoon had, by evening, become a howling gale. Wind lashed at the windows of Greymoor, driving rain against the glass in sheets. Caroline sat by the fire in her sitting room, attempting to focus on a novel while the storm raged outside. A sudden commotion in the entrance hall drew her attention. She heard voices, the heavy oak door opening and closing, footsteps on the stone floor. Curious, she set aside her book and moved to the corridor, where she found Mrs. Hodgson directing 2 footmen who were struggling with a large trunk. "What's happening?" Caroline asked, raising her voice above the sound of the wind. Mrs. Hodgson turned, her expression a mixture of alarm and excitement. "A visitor, your Caroline, arrived just now in the worst of the storm." "A visitor? In this weather? Who would—" Before she could complete the question, the entrance hall door opened again, admitting a gust of wind, rain, and a tall figure in a dripping greatcoat. The hood fell back, revealing a face Caroline had not seen in 3 years but would have known anywhere. Hugh Aldridge, Duke of Silverton, stood in her hall, looking like a man who had ridden through hell itself to reach her door. "Hello, Caroline," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I believe we have much to discuss." Caroline froze, certain she must be dreaming. Hugh stood before her, rain dripping from his greatcoat onto the stone floor, his face haggard and drawn in ways that went beyond mere travel fatigue. His once immaculate appearance was dishevelled, his hair longer than fashion dictated, his cheeks hollow beneath several days' growth of beard. "Your Grace," she finally managed, falling back on formality as a shield. "This is unexpected." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Indeed. May I—" He swayed slightly, catching himself against the door frame. Caroline's instincts overrode her shock. "Mrs. Hodgson, have a fire lit in the blue bedchamber immediately, and send to the kitchen for hot soup and tea." She turned to the footman. "Simmons, help His Grace upstairs." "That won't be necessary," Hugh protested, straightening with visible effort. "I'm perfectly capable." Whatever he meant to say was lost as his knees buckled. The footman lunged forward, catching him before he could fall. "Stubborn as ever," Caroline muttered, moving quickly to his other side. "Upstairs now." Between them, they managed to guide Hugh up the grand staircase to the east wing, where the blue bedchamber, the finest guest room at Greymore, awaited. By the time they reached it, servants had already lit a roaring fire and turned down the bedcovers. "Leave us," Caroline instructed, once Hugh was seated in a chair by the fire. "Bring hot water and towels, then the food when it's ready." When they were alone, she studied him more carefully. His skin had a sallow undertone that spoke of recent illness, and fine lines had appeared around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Yet those eyes remained the same startling blue-grey, now watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "So you should remove that wet coat before you catch your death," she said briskly, falling into the practical role that had become second nature. Hugh complied without argument, a worrying sign in itself. As he struggled with the heavy wool, Caroline moved to help him, then stopped herself, uncertain of the boundaries between them. "Thank you," he said quietly as he finally shed the garment. Beneath it, his clothes were relatively dry, though crumpled from travel. "Your hospitality is more than I deserve." Caroline busied herself hanging the coat near the fire. "Why are you here, Hugh?" He didn't answer immediately, staring into the flames. "I received your letter. That was weeks ago, and it hardly explains why you've appeared on my doorstep in the middle of a storm, half dead from exhaustion. I wasn't in London when it arrived. I was at Silverton Abbey recovering." He looked up at her. "The rumours of my illness were not exaggerated. Malaria, contracted in Bengal. The doctors weren't certain I would survive." Despite everything, Caroline felt a pang of sympathy. "Yet here you are." "Yes, here I am." His gaze travelled around the room, noting the changes she had made. The lighter wallpaper, the vase of late roses on the dressing table, the books stacked neatly beside the bed. "You've transformed Greymore." "I've had 3 years to do so," she replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. A knock at the door announced the arrival of hot water and towels. Caroline directed the maid to leave them on the washstand, then excused herself while Hugh refreshed himself. She used the moment's reprieve to gather her thoughts in the corridor outside. Hugh, here. After all this time, the reality of it was still sinking in. What could possibly have driven him to make such a journey, especially in his weakened state? When she returned, he had washed the travel grime from his face and hands and looked marginally more like the aristocrat she remembered. He stood by the window, watching the storm lash the moors. "A bleak prospect," he commented. "I never understood why my uncle was so attached to this place." "Your uncle?" Caroline asked, surprised by this new piece of information. Hugh nodded. "Greymore belonged to my mother's brother, Lord Cavendish, a recluse with peculiar habits. When he died without issue, the property came to me. You never mentioned this before." "I never mentioned many things." He turned from the window to face her. "That is why I'm here, Caroline. There are truths you deserve to know." Another knock heralded the arrival of soup, bread, and tea. Caroline directed the maid to set the tray on the small table by the fire, then dismissed her. "Eat first," she instructed Hugh. "Whatever revelations you've brought can wait until you've restored your strength." To her surprise, he obeyed without protest, sitting down to consume the simple meal with evident appreciation. Caroline took a chair opposite him, pouring tea for them both. The domesticity of the scene struck her as surreal, serving tea to the husband who had abandoned her in the house to which he had exiled her. When Hugh had finished eating, colour had returned to his face, though the shadows beneath his eyes remained. He leaned back in his chair, cradling his teacup in long, elegant fingers. "Thank you," he said simply. "I had forgotten how direct you can be. Most women of my acquaintance would have swooned at my appearance, then pestered me with questions while I collapsed from hunger. I am not most women," Caroline replied, "nor am I truly of your acquaintance, despite our legal connection." He winced at that. A fair point. Setting aside his cup, he met her gaze directly. "I owe you an explanation for my actions 3 years ago." "Yes, you do." It will not be a pleasant tale, nor one that excuses my behavior. But perhaps it might help you understand. Caroline nodded, bracing herself. I'm listening. Hugh rose, moving to stand by the fire. The flames cast his face in sharp relief, highlighting the new hollows in his cheeks. You asked, on our wedding day, why I chose you as my bride. I gave you a partial truth, that I required a wife who understood discretion and duty. What I didn't tell you was why I needed such qualities. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Have you heard of Lady Eleanor Brampton? The name was vaguely familiar to Caroline. I believe so, the daughter of the Marquess of Wexford. There was some scandal. Yes, 7 years ago she was the most celebrated debutante of the season. Beautiful, accomplished, from an impeccable family. His voice took on a bitter edge. I was 25, newly invested with the dukedom after my father's death. Eleanor and we formed an attachment. Caroline listened silently, beginning to see where this tale might lead. We became engaged. The wedding was to be the social event of the year. Hugh's hands clenched at his sides. A week before the ceremony, I discovered she had been carrying on a clandestine affair with my closest friend, Richard Harlow, Viscount Pemberley. Oh, Caroline breathed. How dreadful for you. Hugh laughed without humor. The betrayal was excruciating, yes, but what followed was worse. When I confronted Eleanor, she confessed not only to the affair, but to being with child, Pemberley's child. She begged me to go through with the wedding, to claim the child as my own, to save her from disgrace. And you refused, Caroline guessed. Of course I refused. I was young, proud, furious at the deception. I broke the engagement publicly, exposing her infidelity to all of London. His expression darkened. 2 days later, Eleanor took her own life. She drowned herself in the lake at her father's estate. Caroline gasped. How terrible! Terrible indeed. Her family was devastated. Her father, the Marquis, blamed me entirely. He claimed I had driven her to despair with my callous rejection. Many in society agreed. Hugh's voice grew hollow. Perhaps they were right. Had I handled the matter more discreetly, had I shown more compassion, you cannot blame yourself for her choices, Caroline said softly. She deceived you cruelly. Hugh shook his head. A man in my position has responsibilities beyond his personal feelings. I failed in those responsibilities, and a young woman died, her unborn child with her. He returned to his chair, sitting heavily. The scandal was immense. The Marquess swore to ruin me socially and financially. My reputation was in tatters. Even the Prince Regent suggested I remove myself from London until the matter faded from memory. So you retreated to Silverton Abbey? For 2 years, yes. I avoided society completely. When I finally returned to London, I found attitudes toward me had softened somewhat, but the Wexford family's animosity remained undiminished. He met her eyes directly. Which brings me to you, Caroline. Me? She frowned, confused by the connection. By then, I had resolved never to marry. I would let the title pass to my cousin upon my death, but my solicitor informed me that certain entailed properties, including Silverton Abbey itself, could only pass to a direct heir or a widow. Without either, they would revert to the crown. Understanding began to dawn on Caroline. So you needed a wife to secure your inheritance, but not a true marriage. Hugh nodded. I required a bride who would accept unusual terms, who would not expect love or even companionship. When your father approached my solicitor about a potential match, suggesting you would accept almost any arrangement to save your family from ruin, it seemed convenient. Caroline felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. I was a business transaction. Yes, he admitted, though I told myself I was being generous, rescuing you from poverty. In truth, I chose you because you seemed perfect for my purposes. No connections to powerful families who might object to your treatment. No reputation for romantic notions. No beauty striking enough to tempt me from my resolve to keep the marriage in name only. His words stung, though Caroline had long suspected such calculations. And Greymore? Why exile me here specifically? A shadow crossed Hugh's face. Greymore was where Eleanor and I were to spend our honeymoon. After her death, I couldn't bear to visit it, yet could not bring myself to sell it either. When I needed somewhere to place you, it seemed fitting. A house of disappointed hopes for a marriage that would never be real. How poetic. Caroline said dryly, masking her hurt with sarcasm. Hugh flinched at her tone. I deserved that. My behavior was inexcusable. Yet, you're here now, explaining yourself, Caroline observed. Why? What changed? He was silent for a long moment, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I nearly died in India. Fever, delirium for weeks. I was there negotiating trade agreements for the Crown. Something to occupy my mind, to feel useful. His eyes took on a faraway look. In my delirium, I saw Eleanor. Not as she was at the end, desperate and afraid, but as she might have been had she lived, bitter, trapped in a loveless marriage, raising another man's child while resenting me for her situation. Caroline listened, fascinated despite herself. And then, Hugh continued, I saw you, not as you were when I left you here, shocked and betrayed, but as I imagined you must be now, lonely, abandoned, perhaps hating me, and rightfully so. He met her eyes directly. It made me realize that in trying to protect myself from another Eleanor, I had created a similar situation, trapping a woman in circumstances not of her choosing, causing pain to save my pride. The situations are hardly comparable, Caroline pointed out. I did not deceive you. I upheld my end of our arrangement, however unpleasant. Precisely, Hugh said, leaning forward earnestly. You deserved better than what I gave you. When I began to recover, I resolved to right this wrong. Your letter arrived just as I was considering how to approach you. And what exactly do you propose to do now? Caroline asked, struggling to keep her voice level. You cannot undo 3 years of exile with a single conversation. Hugh ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of uncertainty she had never seen from him before. I know that. I came to offer you choices, Caroline. Real choices. Not the illusion of choice I gave you before. What sort of choices? She asked warily. First, if you wish to continue as you are, managing Greymore independently, I will formalize the arrangement legally. The estate will be yours entirely, not held in trust or subject to my whim. You would have complete autonomy, financially and otherwise. Caroline's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's generous. It's the least I can do, Hugh replied. Second, if you prefer to leave Yorkshire altogether, I will establish you in London or anywhere else you choose, with a house and income befitting your rank. You could rejoin society as the Duchess of Silverton, with all the privileges and respect that entails. And you would acknowledge me publicly? Caroline asked skeptically. Yes, though we might still live separately, there would be no more secrecy, no more pretending you don't exist. Caroline considered this. After 3 years of rural isolation, the thought of London's bustling streets and social whirl was both tempting and intimidating. And the third choice? Hugh hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. The third option is more complicated. How so? He looked up, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. You could return with me to Silverton Abbey. As my true wife, not merely in name. Caroline stared at him, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon? My illness changed me, Caroline. Facing death has a way of clarifying what matters. His voice grew softer. I've spent years punishing both of us for Eleanor's betrayal. I've lived half a life, holding everyone at a distance. I don't want to continue that way. So I'm to be your salvation? Caroline asked, incredulous. The convenient wife becomes the convenient redeemer? Hugh winced. I deserve your skepticism, but this isn't about convenience. It's about... He struggled for words. Possibility. The possibility that two people bound by circumstance might find something genuine between them. Caroline rose abruptly, needing distance from him and the unexpected turn of this conversation. She moved to the window, watching rain stream down the glass, her thoughts in turmoil. Why would I even consider such an arrangement? She asked finally. You abandoned me without a second thought. You threatened my father. You've shown no interest in my existence for 3 years. All true, Hugh acknowledged. I have no right to ask anything of you, but I hoped, that you might at least consider it. Caroline turned back to face him. Based on what? A deathbed conversion and pretty words? You don't even know me, Hugh. The woman you married no longer exists. Greymore changed her. Then let me know the woman you've become, he said simply. Give me the chance to earn your trust, if not your affection. The earnestness in his voice was so at odds with the cold, distant man she remembered that Caroline found herself momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, a fit of coughing seized Hugh, harsh and racking. He pressed a handkerchief to his mouth, his shoulders shaking with the effort to control it. Caroline moved to him instinctively, pouring a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. "Here," she said, offering it when the coughing subsided. "You should rest. This conversation has taxed your strength." Hugh accepted the water gratefully. "I'm stronger than I appear," he said after drinking. "But perhaps you're right. We needn't resolve everything tonight." "No," Caroline agreed. "We have time." The realization struck her as strange. After 3 years of enforced separation, they suddenly had time. "Will you at least consider my proposals?" Hugh asked, his voice rough from coughing. "Not just the third option, but all of them?" "Take as long as you need." Caroline studied him, this man who was legally her husband, yet practically a stranger. The man who had wounded her deeply, yet now sat before her offering restitution. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes held a sincerity she had never seen in them before. "I will consider them," she said finally, "but I make no promises. And I have questions, many questions that will need answering before I decide anything." Relief washed over Hugh's features. "Thank you. That's more than I had any right to expect." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Hodgson entered at Caroline's call. "Pardon the intrusion," the housekeeper said, glancing curiously between them, "but the storm has worsened considerably. The bridge over the Grimsley Beck has flooded. No one will be travelling in or out of Greymore until the waters recede." Hugh looked to Caroline, a question in his eyes. "It appears, Your Grace," she said with a hint of irony, "that you'll be our guest for some time, whether either of us planned it or not." The next morning dawned clear but cold, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Caroline rose early, as was her habit, and found Mrs. Hodgson already directing the servants in their daily tasks with an extra degree of nervous energy. "His Grace still sleeps," the housekeeper reported in hushed tones. "Dr. Bennett arrived at first light to check the bridge. He says it will be at least 3 days before the waters recede enough for safe crossing." 3 days, Caroline repeated, absorbing this information. 3 days with Hugh under her roof after 3 years of absence. The symmetry was not lost on her. "I've had breakfast prepared in the morning room," Mrs. Hodgson continued. "Will you be wanting a tray sent up to His Grace when he wakes?" "No," Caroline decided. "When he appears, direct him to join me. In the meantime, I'll be in my office reviewing the harvest accounts. There's no reason to disrupt our normal routine." But her concentration on the accounts proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to Hugh's revelations and proposals. The story of Eleanor Brampton explained much about his behaviour, though it hardly excused it. Caroline had heard of similar scandals in London society. Engagements broken, reputations ruined, families divided by recriminations. But a suicide was different. The guilt of such an outcome would weigh heavily on anyone with a conscience. Had Hugh truly changed, as he claimed, or was this another calculated move to secure his own interests? She was still pondering these questions when a knock came at her office door shortly after 11 o'clock. Hugh entered at her invitation, looking considerably better than he had the previous night. He had shaved, and someone, probably Simmons, had found him clean clothes that fit reasonably well. "Good morning," he said, hesitating at the threshold. "Mrs. Hodgson said I might find you here." Caroline gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," he admitted, taking the offered seat. "There's something about the air here. I had forgotten how clean it smells after rain." An awkward silence fell between them. Caroline was acutely aware of how strange it was to be conducting what amounted to morning small talk with the man who had abandoned her at this very house. "I understand we're to be weather-bound for several days," Hugh said finally. "So it seems. The Beck becomes a river after heavy rain. It's one of Greymore's more inconvenient features." She set aside her ledger. "Are you feeling stronger today?" "Much. Whatever was in that soup last night worked wonders." He glanced around her office, taking in the neat shelves of account books, the map of the estate pinned to one wall, the vase of late roses on the windowsill. "You've made this room your own. It was my uncle's gun room, as I recall. I saw little need for a gun room when I had no guns and no interest in acquiring them," Caroline replied. The light is good for reading figures. Hugh nodded, his gaze continuing to explore the space. You keep the accounts yourself? I do. Mr. Wilson, the steward, prepares the initial figures, but I review everything. It's my responsibility to ensure Greymore runs efficiently. Impressive, Hugh murmured, and to her surprise he seemed genuinely to mean it. Most duchesses would consider such tasks beneath them. I am hardly most duchesses, Caroline reminded him. Necessity has been an excellent teacher. So I see. His eyes returned to her face, studying her with a new thoughtfulness. You've built a life here, haven't you? Despite everything. Caroline considered denying it, downplaying her achievements out of pride or lingering resentment. But what would be the point? Yes, she acknowledged. It wasn't what I would have chosen, but I've made it mine. Hugh's expression softened with something that looked remarkably like admiration. Tell me about it. This life you've built. The request caught her off guard. In all their brief interactions during their courtship and wedding, he had never shown interest in her thoughts or experiences. Yet now he seemed genuinely curious. Cautiously, Caroline began to describe her early days at Greymore, the intimidated girl trying to find her place in a strange house, the gradual assumption of responsibilities, the first tentative decisions about renovations and improvements. As she spoke, Hugh listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that showed he was truly engaging with her story. The first winter was the hardest, she found herself confessing. The isolation, the cold, the darkness. I thought I might go mad from loneliness. I'm sorry, Hugh said quietly. Truly, I never considered how difficult it would be for you. Caroline acknowledged his apology with a slight nod. Spring helped. I began working in the gardens, meeting the tenant farmers, learning about the land. Each small success gave me confidence for the next challenge. Their conversation continued through a light luncheon served in the morning room, with Caroline gradually revealing more about Greymore's transformation under her care, the renovated tenant cottages, the improved crop rotations, the new breeds of sheep introduced to the upper pastures. And the house itself, Hugh asked, gesturing to indicate the changes visible even in the room where they sat. Room by room, as funds allowed, Caroline explained. The roof came first, of course, then the windows. So many were broken or ill-fitting. The redecoration was a more recent indulgence. It suits you, Hugh observed. Light, practical, yet not without beauty. His eyes lingered on her face as he spoke, causing a strange flutter in Caroline's chest that she firmly suppressed. Thank you, she said, rising from the table. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to this afternoon. Please feel free to explore the house or rest as you prefer. Dinner is served at 7. Hugh stood as well, looking as though he wanted to say more but thinking better of it. Of course, thank you for your time, Caroline. She left him there, needing space to collect her thoughts. This new attentive Hugh was disconcerting, so different from the cold, dismissive man who had left her at Greymore's door 3 years ago. Part of her warned that it could be an act, a calculated charm to win her compliance with whatever he truly wanted. Yet another part, a part she had thought long silenced, wondered if perhaps his illness had genuinely changed him. If, faced with mortality, he had recognized the emptiness of a life dictated by pride and fear. As the afternoon progressed, Caroline found herself watching Hugh surreptitiously as he explored Greymore. From her office window, she observed him walking in the garden, pausing to examine the roses she had planted along the south wall. Later, passing the library, she glimpsed him studying the collection of books she had gradually assembled, modest compared to a ducal library, but chosen with care to reflect her interests in agriculture, music, and natural history. By the time they met again for dinner, Caroline had resolved to use their enforced proximity to learn more about this changed man who claimed to want a second chance. Whether his transformation was genuine or merely expedient, understanding his true motives would help her make a clear-eyed decision about her future. Dinner was served in the small dining room. Caroline had never used the grand formal dining hall with its oversized table that would seat 30. Hugh arrived punctually, dressed in what must have been his traveling clothes, now cleaned and pressed. Caroline wore one of her simpler evening gowns, a deep blue silk that she had ordered from York the previous year. As they took their seats, an air of formality descended that had been absent from their earlier conversations. The presence of footmen serving each course seemed to remind them both of their respective positions. Duke and Duchess, estranged yet still bound by law, and now breaking bread at the same table. "I spent some time in your library today," Hugh remarked as the soup course was served. "Your collection on agricultural improvements is quite comprehensive." "A necessity rather than a luxury," Caroline replied. "When I arrived, Greymoor's farming methods were decades behind the times. I needed to educate myself quickly. Nevertheless impressive. I particularly noted Young's a 6-month tour through the north of England, not light reading by any measure." Caroline couldn't help a small smile. "No, but invaluable for understanding the potential of these northern soils. Have you read it?" "Parts," Hugh admitted, "though I confess I found his prose style somewhat laborious." "That's diplomatic of you," Caroline said, her smile widening slightly. "I found it positively soporific in places, but the information was worth the struggle." A hint of answering amusement flickered in Hugh's eyes, and for a brief moment something like natural rapport existed between them. It faded quickly, but its very possibility startled Caroline. As the meal progressed through its courses, their conversation ranged across various topics: the challenges of estate management, the political situation with France, the changing fashions in London that neither of them particularly followed. Hugh proved to be knowledgeable and thoughtful, with opinions that sometimes surprised Caroline with their progressive nature. "You believe women should have more legal rights to property?" she asked, genuinely curious, when the subject arose. "I do," he answered without hesitation. "The current laws are archaic and unjust. A woman's security shouldn't depend entirely on the goodwill of her male relatives." He paused, seeming to realize the irony of his statement given their own situation. "Though I've hardly been an exemplar of such beliefs in practice." "No," Caroline agreed, studying him over the rim of her wineglass. "Your actions and your principles seem somewhat at odds." Hugh met her gaze directly. "They have been. That is something I hope to rectify if given the chance." The moment hung between them, weighted with implication. Caroline broke it by signaling for dessert to be served. As they finished their meal with poached pears and sweet wine, Hugh broached a topic that had clearly been on his mind. "Tomorrow, if you're amenable, I would like to see more of what you've done with the estate, the farms, the improvements you mentioned." Caroline considered the request. It would mean spending hours in his company, showing him the world she had built in his absence. Yet it would also give her further opportunity to gauge his sincerity. "Very well," she agreed. "We can ride out after breakfast. The weather should be favorable, according to Mr. Simmons." "Thank you," Hugh said, and again that unexpected sincerity colored his tone. "I'm eager to understand the Greymoor you've created." When they parted for the evening, Caroline retired to her sitting room to sort through her conflicted feelings. The day had been surreal, conversing with Hugh as though they were merely acquaintances getting to know each other, rather than a husband and wife with a painful history between them. Yet wasn't that essentially the truth? They were strangers to each other in all the ways that mattered. Their brief courtship had been conducted through solicitors and chaperones, their wedding a cold business arrangement, their marriage a legal fiction. Now, for the first time, they were actually speaking to each other as people, learning each other's thoughts, observing each other's habits and preferences. The question remained, to what end? What did she truly want from this unexpected reunion? Independence, security, respect. These she had already fought for and won through her own efforts at Greymoor. Did she want more? Could she trust Hugh's apparent change of heart? And even if she could, was she willing to risk the peace she had built for the uncertain promise of a true marriage? Caroline had no answers as she finally retired to bed. But as she drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallized with surprising clarity. Whatever choice she made, it would be hers alone this time, not forced by circumstance or dictated by others. In that, at least, she and Hugh now stood on equal ground. Yorkshire, 1805. The following morning dawned clear but cold. Hugh's carriage had been brought around to the front of Greymoor, his luggage loaded, the horses fresh and eager for the journey. Caroline stood on the front steps watching as Hugh gave final instructions to his coachman. They had shared breakfast amicably, but now that the moment of parting had arrived, an awkwardness had descended between them. Finally, Hugh approached her. "I want to thank you, Caroline, For your hospitality, your candor, and your willingness to consider a new beginning between us. Safe journey, she replied simply. He hesitated, then reached into his coat and withdrew a small package wrapped in silk. I brought this for you. It was my mother's. I thought you might like it. Caroline unwrapped the silk to reveal a small, exquisitely crafted silver music box engraved with roses and ivy leaves. It plays a Mozart minuet, Hugh explained. She kept it on her dressing table and wound it each night. It always reminded me of her, elegant but unpretentious. Caroline opened the lid, and sweet, clear notes filled the air between them. It's beautiful, thank you. I should go, Hugh said. The bridge won't remain passable indefinitely. Yes, and I expect your letter soon, Caroline added, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. Hugh's expression brightened. Within the week, he promised. Then, with formal correctness, he bowed over her hand, his lips barely brushing her knuckles. As he straightened, their eyes met, and Caroline was startled by the mixture of hope and uncertainty she saw in his gaze. "Until we meet again, Caroline," Hugh said softly. "Until then," she replied. He turned and walked to his carriage. The footman closed the door, and within moments, the ducal equipage was rolling down the gravel drive toward the gates of Greymore. Caroline remained on the steps, the music box still playing in her hands, until the carriage disappeared from view. Yorkshire to Derbyshire, autumn 1805. True to his word, Hugh's first letter arrived at Greymore 5 days after his departure, delivered by special courier. The letter, written in a strong, decisive hand, surprised Caroline with its warmth. "My dear Caroline, I write to you from my study overlooking the eastern gardens, where autumn is painting the trees in shades that remind me of your riding habit. The journey from Greymore was uneventful, though I confess I found the silence of travelling alone somewhat oppressive after our conversations. You asked to know more of Silverton Abbey. It is an ancient place, parts dating to the 12th century, though most is Tudor. Unlike Greymore's haphazard growth, Silverton was largely rebuilt during Elizabeth's reign, 4 wings around a central courtyard, with the original Abbey Church attached to the east wing. Since my return, I have begun reviewing the estate accounts with new eyes. Your influence, I must acknowledge. I was dismayed to discover how much I had overlooked through inattention. The tenant farms particularly show signs of the same backward practices you so effectively reformed at Greymore. I find myself wondering what you would make of it all, what improvements your practical mind would envision. I catch myself thinking, Caroline would know how to address this. Strange, is it not, how quickly one can become accustomed to valuing another's perspective. The truth is this: I am a flawed man who has lived selfishly, allowing past hurts to justify unkindness. I cannot undo what I did to you, but I can offer a different future if you wish to claim it. With sincere regard, Hugh. After careful consideration, Caroline composed a reply. Dear Hugh, your letter found me occupied with harvest accounts. The wheat crop exceeded expectations this year, while the barley suffered from the August rains. Such is the farmer's perpetual gamble with nature's caprice. Your description of Silverton Abbey intrigues me. A house with Tudor foundations suggests fascinating architectural details. Does it feature the long galleries so popular in that era? I have always admired their aesthetic purpose, combined with practical function during inclement weather. Your mention of neglected gardens catches my interest. The gardens at Greymore have been my personal project and source of great satisfaction. There is something deeply rewarding about coaxing beauty and order from neglect, whether in flowerbeds or account books. As for our correspondence, I find I welcome it. These exchanges allow us to become acquainted in ways our brief marriage did not permit. Whether this leads to reconciliation or merely to a better understanding, it seems a worthwhile endeavor. The music box sits on my bedside table. Its melody is indeed as elegant as you described. Until your next letter, Caroline thus began a correspondence that spanned the weeks leading to Caroline's visit to Silverton. Every 3rd or 4th day brought a new letter from Hugh, each revealing more of his thoughts and growing self-awareness. Caroline responded in kind, gradually allowing more of herself to emerge in her words. In mid-October, a letter arrived that shifted their correspondence. I visited Eleanor's grave yesterday. It stands in the Brampton family plot, a simple stone with her name and dates, nothing of the vibrant, complicated woman she was. Standing there in the autumn rain, I finally faced what I had not allowed myself to acknowledge. My role in her desperation was real, but the choice she made was ultimately her own. I have carried the full weight of her death as penance, using it to justify my withdrawal from genuine human connection, including with you, Caroline. I blamed you for not being her, then punished you for reminding me of her. The cruelty and injustice of this shames me deeply now. What I wish you to know is this. My interest in reconciliation is not born from guilt or loneliness, though I have felt both. It comes from recognizing the woman of intelligence, courage, and principle that you are, a woman I never truly saw before. As the date for her visit approached, Caroline found herself both anticipating and dreading the journey. Meeting Hugh on neutral ground at Greymore had been one thing. Seeing him in his ancestral home would be quite another. Silverton Abbey, Derbyshire, November 1805. The journey from Yorkshire to Derbyshire took 2 full days. As the carriage turned onto a tree-lined drive, Caroline caught glimpses of parkland dotted with ancient oaks, their leaves in the final stages of autumn gold. The drive curved, and suddenly Silverton Abbey appeared, a magnificent Tudor building of warm red brick with stone facings, its 4 wings arranged around a central courtyard. Unlike Greymoor's forbidding grey stone, Silverton seemed to welcome visitors, its proportions grand but not overwhelming. The carriage drew up before the main entrance. Hugh stood waiting on the steps, flanked by a double line of servants. The formality struck Caroline forcefully. This was no casual visit, but her first official arrival as Duchess of Silverton. "Welcome to Silverton Abbey, Caroline," Hugh said warmly. The great hall took Caroline's breath away. Soaring 2 stories high with a hammer-beam ceiling and walls hung with ancient tapestries. Hugh guided her through stately reception rooms and finally into a long gallery that ran the length of the south wing. "You asked about Tudor galleries in your letter," he reminded her. "This one offers views of both the formal gardens and the lake." Caroline moved to one of the tall windows, looking out over meticulously maintained parterres. "It's beautiful. The whole house is remarkable." "Thank you," Hugh replied, coming to stand beside her. "Though I can take little credit for it, generations of Aldridges have shaped Silverton." "Yet you are its current steward," Caroline observed. "The choices you make will determine what future generations inherit." Hugh looked at her with intensity. "Precisely so. It's a perspective I've only recently come to appreciate fully. I've realized that a great house needs more than mere maintenance. It needs purpose, direction, heart." The implication hung between them. Hugh believed Silverton needed her, just as he had suggested he himself did. That evening at dinner, Caroline asked the question that had been foremost in her mind. "What exactly are you proposing, Hugh? If I were to choose your third option, to return here as your true wife, what would that mean in practice?" Hugh met her eyes steadily. "In practice, it would mean sharing a life in the fullest sense, a true marriage, not merely a legal arrangement. You would be Duchess of Silverton in every meaningful way, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails." "Including," Caroline prompted, "including the possibility of heirs if you were willing, including shared decisions about Silverton's future, including my fidelity and commitment until death parts us." The directness of his answer left Caroline momentarily speechless. She had imagined perhaps a cordial arrangement, a public reconciliation that maintained private distance. What Hugh described was far more intimate and complete. "That's a significant change from your previous position," she said finally. "Yes," Hugh acknowledged. "As I said, my illness changed me. Facing mortality clarifies what truly matters." He paused, then added quietly, "Loneliness is a poor companion in one's final hours. Pride is colder still. And if I were to agree, how would we bridge the gap between our current circumstances and such intimacy? We are still virtual strangers in many ways." "We would take time," Hugh replied without hesitation. "Build trust gradually, learn each other's habits, preferences, thoughts." A hint of vulnerability crossed his features. "I would not rush you, Caroline. And my independence, the autonomy I've built at Greymore? I would not ask you to surrender it. Greymore would remain yours to manage as you see fit. Your involvement at Silverton would be by choice, not obligation." His answers were thoughtful, respectful of her concerns. Caroline found herself truly considering the possibility he described, a partnership of equals despite their different backgrounds. In the days that followed, Hugh showed Caroline every aspect of Silverton, from the tenant farms to the village school. Unlike her early days at Greymoor, where she had been left alone, Hugh guided her understanding of Silverton's history, challenges and potential. For her part, Caroline found herself increasingly drawn to the estate's challenges. Each day revealed more of Hugh's genuine change of heart, as he actively sought her input, valued her experience, and implemented her suggestions without hesitation. They discovered shared interests beyond estate management, a love of music that led to evenings by the pianoforte, a mutual appreciation for literature, even an unexpected compatibility in their sense of humor. As Christmas approached and the end of her visit neared, Hugh and Caroline walked through the frost-covered gardens. "I've been thinking about your 3 options," Caroline said quietly, "and I believe I've made my decision." Hugh stopped walking, his expression carefully controlled. "And your answer?" Caroline took a deep breath. "I choose the 3rd option, to return to Silverton as your true wife, but with conditions." Relief and joy washed over Hugh's face. "Name them." "First, we continue as we have been, building trust gradually, allowing feelings to develop naturally. No expectations of immediate intimacy." "Of course," Hugh agreed readily. "Second, I maintain my independence at Greymoor. I wish to divide my time between both estates, at least initially." "Agreed. Your work there is too important to abandon." "And third," Caroline said, meeting his gaze directly, "you must promise never to shut me out again. No matter what difficulties arise between us, we face them together, with honesty and respect." Hugh took her hands in his expression solemn. "I swear it, Caroline. Never again will you face coldness or abandonment from me." He paused, then added softly, "I believe I'm falling in love with you, not as an idea or a convenience, but as the remarkable woman you are." Caroline felt a smile spreading across her face, warming her from within despite the December chill. "And I believe I may be falling in love with you too. Not the Duke of Silverton, but the man who crossed England to beg forgiveness and prove himself worthy of a second chance." Hugh's eyes shone with emotion. "May I kiss you, Caroline? I've wanted to since that day at Greymoor when you challenged everything I thought I knew about you." "About us?" "Yes," she whispered. He drew her gently into his arms, and their lips met in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When they parted, Caroline rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart beneath layers of wool and linen. "Welcome home, Duchess," Hugh murmured against her hair. Caroline smiled against his coat. "Home," she repeated, testing the word and finding it true. After 3 years of exile and months of uncertainty, she had found not just a house, but a heart to call home, and a future built not on duty or convenience, but on genuine love and respect. Above them, snow began to fall, delicate flakes settling on the formal gardens of Silverton Abbey, nature's blessing on a love that had weathered storm and separation to find its way to spring. The end. Dear listener, the seasons of life, like those from Yorkshire to Derbyshire, change without consulting us. Sometimes we find ourselves exiled to desolate moors where the wind seems to cut through our very soul. Like Caroline, perhaps you have faced abandonments, disappointments, or losses that seemed like final verdicts on your happiness. But observe how she transformed Greymoor, not in a day, not in a week, but through 3 years of small victories. A roof repaired, a garden planted, a decision to rise once more when winter seemed endless. You too have this strength, the capacity to build beauty from ruins, to find purpose where others see only desolation, to become not merely a survivor, but a steward of your own destiny. And as Hugh discovered belatedly, pride is a cold companion on the darkest nights. The walls we build to protect ourselves often become our prisons. It is never too late to cross the metaphorical England of your life and ask forgiveness of others and of yourself. Remember that the second chapter, third or fourth of your story, can be entirely different from the first. Relationships can be healed. Hearts can change. Exiles can end. As you fall asleep tonight, know that you are protected by the same starry sky that illuminates Silverton Abbey. Your resilience is your lullaby, and tomorrow brings possibilities not yet written. Sleep peacefully, knowing that your capacity to rebuild, forgive, and love remains intact, no matter what storms you have weathered. As Caroline and Hugh discovered, sometimes we must lose something to truly value what has been before us all along. And like them, you deserve an ending where love, respect, and understanding triumph over old wounds. Rest well, dream deeply, and awaken renewed to write the next chapter of your own redemption story, with gratitude for sharing this moment with us. The Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this emotional journey. If this tale touched your heart, we warmly invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support helps us continue creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another one of our historical stories. Click it and be surprised by more beautiful tales like this. With all our gratitude, the Legends of the Fall Team